So we have something different today. We're taking an essay by Mieko Kawakami, "The Flowers Look More Beautiful Now Than Ever." And we're not going to try to dissect it or do a literary analysis like usual. I want to react to this. So one of the first things that kind of pops into my head here is we have this quote. It says, "It's hard to imagine a country where a lockdown would function perfectly. But in the case of Japan, which lacks basic individualism, the current situation has bred insidious hatred and division." And I'll tell you what, even without the individual, the basic individual, which we have a lot of in America, we still had the insidious hatred and division.
And still do, unfortunately, a lot of times. That's a very bold statement. And it's kind of strange to me to think, how can you be divided if you don't have individualism? Or can you only be divided if you don't have individualism? That's a pretty deep question about how a society functions as a whole. And I think Japan is very unique in that perspective and has been for centuries. I don't think this is anything new, kind of what their experience has been historically.
It's in the phrasing when you say they don't have individualism. Of course they have individualism. What's different, though, is how does society's influence impact how you express individualism? If you step too far out of the line, that's when you get browbeaten in Japan, right? When she talks here in the article about how if you were out driving around and they would publish your name in the newspaper, like almost like an invasion of privacy of how could this person be so disrespectful to society is kind of what I think they're trying to accomplish, and we're on the other side, right? I remember watching memes on the internet, which, during the lockdown, they showed how in the very, very beginning, how Australia's like, okay, we've locked this down and this is what it's like. And Ireland's like, oh, we've locked this down. We've got police stops and we check IDs of where you live and how far are you from your house. And then you got America, right? And like they were portraying us as like drinking, running out, partying.
Oh, no, there was all those videos of college kids still going on spring break in April and going down to Cancun and going and partying at South Beach in Florida and everything. Yeah, it was rampant. But I think that one of the things about this that I think is unique, and we compare a lot of this to the pandemic in 1919, 100 years ago, to COVID in 2020, is technology. I think that played a big part in everything. Is we all were able to see those things, where if you're publishing something just in a newspaper, it might have a limited circulation even 100 years ago, especially in rural areas or people that may not be able to read or just don't want to read the newspaper. Everybody can watch a video. A 5-year-old can watch a video and gain information about it. That was rampant. Social media, I think, played a big role in flaming those fires of division among society, whether you were an individual or not.
Something that I know you're familiar with from a historical perspective is, like the Edo period in terms of how Japan was very close borders. It's interesting how, America, First Amendment, you let me go where I want, or get out of my way, right? You can't tell me where I should or shouldn't go. And it was kind of surreal to learn that Japan was closing its borders to outsiders and obviously it shifted with Omicron again, coming in after this article and such, but you saw a very strict implementation that is governmentally enforced that literally split families, right? Like international students and people that were, abroad at the time literally broke families apart. It was very surreal when you compare it to our experience, where, you had videos of people acting hysterically when it came to them perhaps respecting others, I guess is one way of phrasing it, with spacing and stuff like that.
I think a lot of it comes down to governmental regulation. Obviously, I think that the government there was able to put tighter restrictions. One, they're a much smaller country physically. Two, enforcing it across 330 million people, one of the largest countries in the world, with 50 states having all different laws individually within those states. It would be impossible to almost push a national mandate. So in our regard, I feel like the United States, it was more of a convention of personal responsibility, which some people took to extreme seriousness and people disregarded wholly. And again, that was your right as an American. but also the fact that a lot of it fell on the shoulders of businesses, right? Doctors' offices, movie theaters, grocery stores, they started placing those mandates, which they were allowed to do, as private businesses on, their customers or their people. And I think that's a big difference of why you see like the death toll numbers between like Japan and the United States per capita too, is ours is astronomically higher here in the States compared to a country like Japan and others where the government was able to successfully implement a lot of more of those stricter shutdown regulations.
Well, what's interesting, and she brings it up in this article, she talks about like the testing rates, because I got a lot of this through, if you watch, remember our buddy Sean, the book maniac. I think at the time he was actually living in Japan, and he's recently moved out, but he would talk, week to week about his opinion on how Japan was handling the response. And I know one of the biggest criticisms was the amount of testing. And she kind of talks a little bit about the PCR and alluding to it in this. But one of the biggest things, looking back on it, is the number of tests being performed in Japan was significantly lower than a lot of other countries. And the question is why, right? And when you look at the feedback results, like depending on the time, right? Like I think like they said like 12 point something % was the average positive test rate. Well, Japan had a much higher test rate of 20%. And is that because they were being more selective? Were there more cases going undetected? Obviously, every country had cases where, when someone passed away, do we classify it as coronavirus, or do you classify it as something else if they weren't tested or and such? Like even my granddad went through that. He passed away because he caught coronavirus, but it wasn't even classified as that. So it's interesting how these politics come into play in terms of the testing, because at the same time, Japan's trying to prepare for the Olympics, right? They want to appear more in control, because that's a huge revenue boost, right? In terms of like what different private businesses can make and such off of all these new tourists coming in. They're unfortunately getting hit with one of the best things, the Olympics, in terms of income, at literally the worst time during Corona, which is how do you respond to that? And I think maybe I misunderstood, but it seemed like Kawakami was even kind of like coming down on Japan, saying like, I think you're kind of hiding the numbers a little bit by not having enough tests.
That was a very, I think, big controversial thing during the pandemic, and probably still is today. I know that the statistics of it might always be skewed. I know that there's power in that information. You test more, you're going to see more results. Duh, that's just the nature of testing more. But I feel like it comes a lot down to the economics of it. Is regardless of whether you test 0 people or you tested literally every person every day in your country, people were still getting sick. No matter what the test said, more people were getting sick. More people were dying. There was more strain on the healthcare system. There was an impact economically to every country on the planet, and almost every person, unless you were the owner of Zoom, or Netflix, was seeing some type of, economic, most of the time hardship effect on your company, your business, or your livelihood. So I feel like sometimes those numbers are they're over infatuated of their significance or importance. I felt like it comes down to a lot of the impact on the individual and the economy feels more significant than anything. And I got to be honest, I was so naive and dumb. As soon as they started saying testing, my teacher brain went, they did more school testing? That makes no sense. I had to read it twice, and I'll admit that on camera. I had to read it twice, be like, oh, they're talking about testing of the virus. I'm an idiot.
That's funny. One of the things that makes Kawakami so interesting, so controversial, particularly when you read her interviews, like there's a very viral interview that happened with Haruki Murakami. I know you haven't read some of her longer form literature, but particularly like Breasts and Eggs, which I'd love to do on this channel sometime. She has a very interesting, I think it's safe to call her a feminist view with her, the way that she articulates herself. But she had some biting criticism and became very famous for a lot of the biting criticism of looking at the panel of people deciding what's going to happen for Japan and saying these are all the same age, and they're all men. They all look the same, and they're up there making decisions for how mothers should behave and stuff like that. And I think that was
I think it was appropriate, and I think that we see that again. We start comparing, East and West together here of our different nations and countries and divides and the things that have been going on politically alongside the COVID-19 pandemic. Is you see people starting to feel more empowered to push back. That this is something that I'm going to speak out about because it's affecting our literal lives. You don't get a do-over. There are no extra lives, one-ups in real life. And this is something that nobody alive had experienced, or if there was anybody, that had lived through the Spanish flu of 1919, then, they were 100 years old and a baby when it actually happened. So this is something that was unique for the world and I think brought to perspective a lot of things. And that's why there was a little bit that I kind of disagreed with here of where she was kind of like, that it's a sin to do these or a sin not to do these things. And I was like, I think that death is the ultimate.
I got the quote for you. Let me give you the quote.
Okay. Yeah, read the quote.
It is not a sin to feel. The flowers look more beautiful now than ever. But flowers, in truth, were beautiful yesterday, last year, 5 years ago. And the same is true for the ugliness of the world.
Yeah, see, that's the most powerful kind of quote of the whole essay, I feel like, because death puts everything in perspective. It is the final equalizer. We will all die one day, no matter what. And whatever your belief system is that happens afterwards, it's going to happen. So I feel like this is something that brought to the forefront for the entire planet, all 7-8 billion of us. And that's a strange thing to happen, once in a generation. And I think that she phrased that beautifully. And I love that quote from the story, from the essay.
I think it leads to the question of what are we going to do about that ugliness now that we know that it's there? How are we going to act different? How will we legislate different? Or how will we at the individual level treat each other different? Because there's elements here of how, okay, in Japan, since we're so groupthink's not the right word. Since we're so about the Japanese consciousness of this is how we have to be. And if you get too far out of line, we have to criticize you to get back in line. What can we learn from this? What can we learn to do to be better people? And I think that same thing is arguably true from the United States perspective, perhaps from a different angle. And I guess, maybe that's a question that we ask ourselves here, Crypto, is what is the ugliness that we saw from COVID that we realize we have to change and to recognize that it's always been there and now it's something that we shouldn't ignore anymore?
I think I have a simple answer. It's something that's universal, is to care about people like they're your own family and treat everybody with kindness, because that's free. It costs nothing to be nice to people, and you never know what someone else is going through. And just be kind to one another. It doesn't matter what someone looks like or who they are or how they worship. They're another person. And if you treat them like they were your own, then the world would just be a better place overall.
While the quote is beautiful, right? Like it costs nothing to be nice. Is there not some type of argument there of it does cost something to be nice? And sometimes it requires biting your pride. Sometimes it requires admitting you're wrong. Sometimes it requires just not saying anything when someone else is suffering because they just want to feel heard and not necessarily hear answers or how you think they could have done better. I think there is an element of cost to nicety, and it comes from social awareness too. That I think that to say it's just be nice is beautiful, but it also comes with social awareness. And I think sometimes we eschew that for this intellectualism, that we think that what's right is more important than people's feelings. And I don't know if that's totally true. I also don't know if it's totally wrong, but I know that it's not 100% white and black, the issue.
Oh, it's a very complex issue. I pick up on one key word there that I think it comes down to is you said self, which would lead me to think selfish. These are things that you're like, oh, well, it's my pride. Oh, it's my issue, my problem. I'm doing this for you because I don't agree with you. That's a lot of I statements. That's a lot of me. That's a lot of selfishness. And when we go back to, the Japanese example here from the essay, right? It's that consciousness of society as a whole. If everybody was just nice to each other, then your pride is irrelevant. Your feelings are irrelevant because everybody's just going to be treated the same.
I don't know if just because you treat people the same, it takes away individualism, because I think a lot of people want to be treated differently. I think
Okay,
people
fair.
value things differently. That I
Agreed.
think in order to look at a cohesive unit, there has to be an element and awareness of where do my self-interest and boundaries intersect with not only others, but also on a scale. I know that I might be more vocal than others. I know I might override others in conversations, that it's something that I know that I need to step back and be aware of letting other people's to talk more, for example, right? So saying that there is no self, I think it's defeating. I think you have to be aware of the self and how that intersects with society.
If we come back to the essay to kind of use an example, is the masks, right? That was something that was very controversial that you wouldn't think would be. But just because somebody was wearing a mask or wasn't wearing a mask, people got treated very differently. And again, if everybody just treat each other the same regarding those masks, if you wore one, then that was fine. You didn't have to look at a person and, look down upon them. Or if somebody didn't wear one, then you didn't have to look down upon them either. It was a personal choice that you got to make, at least in our country. And people were heavily judged for that. And if everybody just treated each other the same regarding it, I think that there wouldn't have been that, concrete divide that happened up over something so simple, let alone something, significantly important in life, I guess.
I'm correlating this back to your point about, what does it mean to treat someone nice? What does it mean to treat everyone the same? Well, in 2022, I remember there's times where I was literally the only one wearing the mask, and I'm like, well, should I stop wearing it like everyone else is? Like, my son hasn't been sick in a long time because he's been wearing the mask. It's actually really nice for anyone that has a young kid. You know how often your kid gets sick. And I was kind of like going through these things of like, well, now I'm the outlier, right? Like everyone else is not wearing the mask. And I remember at one point I was sitting there talking with someone. It was in a location. It doesn't matter, but like they didn't hear what I said, because we talked about how important facial expressions are for interacting, and even from that nice perspective of being able to read the social cues and like the facial micro expressions.
Sure.
Well, the person like literally goes like, they put their hand over their mouth and just goes like making fun of the fact that they couldn't understand me through the mask. And it took a while for me to process that. Like I felt bad.
I think that we're social creatures, right? I mean, you were doing what you were supposed to in the beginning, and maybe, and again, I don't actually think this, but in society's eye, you went too long and you didn't conform back.
Right.
And
no,
society
100%,
is
100%.
yeah. And society's so fickle, right? I mean, we wax and wane so often, especially in our society where, the pendulum swings from very conservative to very liberal, back and forth. And it's, and it's constant flux. So it's kind of hard to know where you fit in. And I don't think there's a right answer. Again, my answer was that the answer I thought of was that if everybody's treated with kindness, and whether you're wearing the mask or not wearing the mask, you're not made fun of. You're not ridiculed like that. And if someone isn't, then you wouldn't ridicule them and then pull your mask down and start yelling and shouting because they seemed extra loud because they weren't wearing a mask, or you made funny faces or did extra facial cues, exaggerating your, micro expressions to make fun of the person that wasn't wearing the mask. Like, you wouldn't do that. And I think that just comes back to kind of the essay is, as a society, how are we going to move forward this together? Are we going to do it on our own? Are we going to let private businesses make those decisions for a society? Are we going to let a government make a decision for us? Are we going to fight amongst each other when it's most important, when it's literally life or death? I think the essay brings up a lot of good points about that, and that Japan was unique, but wholly it wasn't unique, as all the world was experiencing this and trying to figure it out one day at a time.
Well, what's so weird is just how radical that change was in 2020, how fast we had to adjust. And I guess to me, it is not as simple as no ridicule is acceptable, because sometimes when people are out of line, Do you just let them go out of line? Should no one say something to them like, hey, you need to step back in line because you're causing a problem for others? Obviously, my mask wasn't causing a problem. This is an apple to oranges situation. But sometimes that ridicule is an element of what makes society. By ridiculing, you are getting people to step into line. And there's a lot more influence on that from Japan's perspective, which is the complete opposite for America, where it's like, don't tell me what to do.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are social pressures where you're going to succumb to that and do what is expected. But, again, in our country, it didn't. People push back harder the other way as a result. But again, I think if you call somebody out for doing something wrong, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But you don't have to viciously attack the person directly. Like you don't have to make fun of their physical features. You don't have to make fun of their intellect. You don't have to attack their family. You can do it in a civil manner and still get your point across, I think is the key of doing it, quote, kindly is what I'm saying.
No, I get you. I get you. I just think there's a ton of nuance there. Right.
Sure.
And I think when we think in too much reductionism, that I think it loses some of the individualism that's out there and that is getting squashed perhaps. So I'm not saying I have the answers, but I just think it's complex, and I thought it was worth talking about. I thought it was a fun experiment today. So I appreciate you spending some time just to kind of explore this topic with me.
Oh, yeah. I think it's a great discussion, and I think that it'll be one for literally the history books, and it will be talked about for a long time with a lot of crazy video evidence for those historians 100 years from now.
All right, guys. Thanks for spending some time with us today. My name's Benuna. Peace out.
Peace.